think we can get started, right? Hey everybody, thank you for coming. It's good to see everyone. I think I know everybody here, but in case there's anybody on Zoom whom I don't know, my name is Dan Boscalvell, and I'm an assistant professor of philosophy in the Department of Social Science and Cultural Studies here at Pratt. And it's my pleasure to be directing the Critical and Visual Studies Symposium for the second year in a row. As most of you will know, Critical and Visual Studies Symposium is a course designed to introduce students to the research of Pratt faculty and distinguished visitors who work in the range of fields that are covered by our department. And the course is structured around presentations by faculty on general themes that change year to year. This year's theme is called Songs for the Dark. So I'll just say a little bit about where that theme comes from. So writing from exile in the 1930s, Bertolt Brecht composed a poem entitled To Posterity, in which he meditated on living in a dark age where, quote, a smooth forehead betokens a hard heart, and to speak of trees is almost a crime, for it is a kind of silence about injustice. How, Brecht wondered, can I eat and drink when my food is snatched from the hungry, and my glass of water belongs to the thirsty, and yet I eat and drink? Sadly, Brecht's questions still resonate with us today. How many of us wonder, can we watch a genocide funded with our taxes, live streamed in high definition, and then continue to go about our day? How do we do our usual work in the shadow of accelerating ecological calamity, knowing that it is precisely business as usual that's tearing the world apart? So in a short poem entitled Motto, we have up here, Brecht comes to a conclusion of sorts. He says, in the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will be singing about the dark times. So in this course, we're confronting the question of how, as thinkers, as artists, as activists, we should relate to the darkness of our times and how we might help to illuminate it. So I want to thank you all again for being here and joining us as we kick off this lecture series, which I'm very excited about, with my esteemed colleague, Lisabeth During. Lisabeth's been the guiding light of the Critical and Visual Studies program for some time and of Pratt's intellectual life in general. And she likely needs no introduction to anybody here, but just in case there's anybody online who's just now stumbling upon Lisabeth's work for the first time, she's a philosopher who writes broadly and beautifully, I would add, on film, aesthetics, and European philosophy. And she teaches a number of courses here at Pratt, including the ever-popular and thematically appropriate Death and Dying, which I believe you're doing right now. Is that right? Yeah. Yes, okay. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth there. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you very much. It's highly appropriate. I mean, indeed, I couldn't resist Dan's invitation when I saw the Brecht poem, because I am working on Weimar, and not only that, but it pushed me into actually sharing with you the only really successful Brechtian film in the history of cinema. It was also made by Bertolt Brecht as a collective, as was his desire in most of the work he did. But this time it really came off. Kuhle Wampe, or to whom the world belongs, or who does the world belong to? But you can't say that, so you have to say it the other way. This was a film that was made in 1931, so not quite the dark times, but the Weimar Republic was not exactly free from shadows and certainly from catastrophe. I'm going to be talking not only about the kind of catastrophe as normal, which was sort of the ongoing mood in the Weimar Republic almost from its opening hours in November 1918, and of course, as we know, it culminated in what I think most of us will acknowledge as one of the darkest times in history of the catastrophe of Nazi rule. So singing about the dark times, filming about the dark times, the Kuhle Wampe film has as one of its central themes songs, the singing of the workers, the Solidarity song that was written for the film by Brecht and Hans Eisler became a very popular political song with slightly different lyrics. It was one of the most popular songs used during the Spanish Civil War. It was recorded by many other people since then. And also in the film, sung by two pretty important people in the Brecht world, his collaborator and also wife, Helene Weigel, and the wonderful Ernst Busch, who was a communist singer, actor, activist, and cabaret performer, who you will see in a number of Weimar films. This one where he Kuhle Wampe, where he plays the boyfriend who has to kind of come to terms with his girlfriend's pregnancy and then decides, maybe I'll just get out of this, but it works out more or less, so it doesn't remain a dark time for her. He's also in Kameradschaft, a film by Pabst, made toward the end of the 20s, about the collaboration between French and German workers during a collapse of a mine, and also very provocative in that it was calling for the breakdown of borders, the breakdown of boundaries in the wake of Weimar's 10 years of complaints about how did this happen? How did we lose a war? Why did they beat us? Why are we suffering? Why are we being laden with this guilt and reparations? To then say, no, you are workers. These are workers. Forget nationality, French and German, you are friends. And Busch was, the obvious German actor to play the role of the leader of the German miners who raced off as soon as they heard about the collapse of the French mine and risked their lives saving their friends. He's also extremely good looking, so that's another point to his favor. And there were a couple of moments when in the Brecht circle, there were young women that Brecht took a fancy for, who really thought, oh, that Ernst Busch, he's pretty, would rather have gone off with him. But Brecht, being a very, very practiced and very good, very eloquent speaker and seducer, always won out. And Busch was the kind of, much more monogamous type who stayed married to his equally communist wife. Anyway, that's just background gossip. So Brecht and singing solidarity and workers are one part of my talk today. Work and workers and something equally dark, the mechanization of the worker and of work, and what that might have spelled both for the annihilation and displacement of the whole working class, as you see in the dystopian future in Metropolis. If you really want to rationalize labor, if you really want to get it under control, don't use human bodies who can get sick and who complain and who have families. Make machines, and that's sort of one of the motivations of the master in Metropolis to eventually drive the workers to such a state of confusion and violence that they will basically destroy their livelihood, and then he will be entitled to replace them with robots. So that's that particular line on the future and what will happen to work and the workers' unorganized lives is the theme of, well, one of the themes of Metropolis. So Metropolis, playing with both the attraction and the horrors of technology, because it's also very skilled at showing how aesthetically beautiful, how compelling technology is. The energy of machines was something that Fritz Lang, like I think a later director probably influenced by him, Stanley Kubrick, was also rather infatuated with machines and the technological future. Lang, as we'll see, manages to cobble together a humanist so-called redemption or resolution to the conflicts created between labor and capital, technology and the human. Nobody liked that ending. Nobody found it anything but extremely silly. This film was described by H.G. Wells, who was also annoyed because he thought, quite rightly, that his book from 30 years before had basically provided the blueprint for Metropolis. But this ending, which if you've seen the film, and even just in the very beginning, it says, the mediator between the head and the hands must be the heart. And that's also the way the film returns. Yes, they're in conflict. yes, there is a class war between labor and capital, between the subordinated machines, whether they're human or artificial, and the brain that can control them, that can predict them, but it will all be fixed with a kind of kinder, gentler, more emotional link between them. So even Lang admitted that this was a terrible ending. He blamed it on his wife, which is quite common for artists. Another one of those art monsters. But the people who did love the ending were who? Anybody can guess who thought that was a really cool ending? Well, Joseph Goebbels thought it was terrific, and the Nazis then supposedly offered Lang a position as the head of the Nazi film industry, which he realized he had to say no and get out very quickly. And then to move to Hollywood, where he succeeded a bit better than some of the other German refugees and exiles, and lived down the street from our other artist that we're talking about today, Bertolt Brecht. So their destinies come together, and they were actually friends. Okay, so Lang and Brecht are, two of my kind of central figures in the talk today, and these two films, one from 1927, one from 1931. And as I hope you have had a chance to look at the abstract, the title is called Who Will Change the World? Labor, Politics, and Movies in the Weimar Republic. And I'll actually, repeat, some of the lines from a longer version of that abstract about the films. Metropolis, I'll probably use this description again, is a fever dream. It's sort of work as seen, almost through a kaleidoscope, when you can, break up and reconnect in a sort of fantastic vision, the elements of factory work. But in it, its working class are returned to the underworld, the modern city, the underworld repressed by the modern city. The underworld, or sort of subtext, that success, that glory, that elegance, that all of the things that, the upper class, not only in Metropolis, but also Weimar, were able to sustain by not looking at the workers. And this is what you can do if you don't want to find out. You make them invisible, and you make them kind of unrecognizable, unhuman. So, making them like moles in an underworld is a sort of ingenious metaphor that he uses, where they, as you see in the film, they await not their mobilization, not their sort of recovery of a sense of worth and power, but their supersession by automata, or possibly by aliens, because this is, for him, this was 100 years in the future. This is what we have to expect. If the workers are restive and can't be brought into control and keep demanding more things, let's get creatures from another planet. So what can they do? What can they hope for? I mean, that's the theme of Kuhle Wampe. Is there anything beyond the dark times, beyond melancholy and resignation? Will it be collective uprising, mass struggle, or will it be a messiah, some force, some kind of spiritual agency sent from outside, from heaven? Kuhle Wampe is quite the opposite. Deliberately, in the way it's produced, and also aesthetically, it's a collective product. And I want to say a little bit also about the way it was made. The production company that made Kuhle Wampe, though they ran out of money at some point, it was pretty common, was part of an international communist sort of organization, or probably we can now almost call it an NGO, called the International Labor's Relief. And it was sort of started by and run by a rather wonderful person whom I want to pay tribute to and remember, because he didn't survive. Willy Munstenberg, not a familiar name. He's sometimes described as the the Red Rupert Murdoch, but in fact he was like a communist impresario, cultural impresario, but also a communist member of parliament of the Reichstag during Weimar, an activist, a brilliant propagandist, and the relief organization didn't just fund movies, this was only one of them, it also raised money to help in the Soviet Union during famine. It started like all kinds of little other organizations working for peace and for workers for workers' issues. Anything else about it that I thought you should know? 4,000 people, not only the entire Comintern, which did provide the money. And was pretty happy with the product, but 4,000 extras were involved in it. I mean, there are also thousands and thousands of people in Metropolis, but the extras in Kuhle Wampe, as intended, actually, were part of how the film was designed and talked about what was to be done and contributed their own performances, as also did the hundreds of members of the sports club. So those people who are, swimming and competing in the film are actually members of left-wing sports clubs. In the first week, Kuhle Wampe didn't do so well. It had 14,000 people watching it. And when you think that 4,000 people were in it, probably if their parents and their best friend came, that was probably the whole audience. Metropolis was a huge blockbuster, incredibly expensive, funded by the state film company, UFA, which was actually put together with money before the First World War from the military and continued to be thought of by the German military as almost their own branch, something that they could have influence on. It was also invested in by a number of very large industrialists, including the absolutely appalling Albert Hugenberg. So, big capital and big military behind Metropolis. It's also in its imagery. It's about the masses and the power of a leader to the masses. So that, as an image, a kind of prophetic allegory for the world that would happen after Kuhle Wampe could no longer be shown. That is 1933 and after. I think it's pretty hard not to see it that way. All right, let's start by looking at a couple of short sequences from both of the films to remind ourselves of what we're looking at. And here is where my technology becomes inept. So if I press this, will I get to something?
You should, but you may have to try that first and see if it works. Yeah.
Just press this?
I'll just...
It's not on the screen.
Yeah.
Is it done?
Let's see.
Do we want to get into?
Yes.
And you were able to watch this through Canopy. Yep.
Yes. And we will. Which one would you like to do?
Let's start with Metropolis because that's earlier.
Okay. So.
Like 3 minutes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. This horrible thing. The mediator between brain and hands must be the heart. The workers of the state are the hands. We can't act for ourselves. We need a further agency. It's actually the Redeemer's theme. Like the leitmotif is a word that Lang took over from Wagner. It kind of stands for a character, symbol. Young Fredo, the son of the master of Metropolis. And again, Lang loves, not only masses and crowds, but how to control the kind of geometric structure of movement. And was trained, at least he claims to be trained, as an architect. The Nazi architect got a few ideas from this.
You just press escape, and then you're trying to go to
Yeah, let's look at the other.
From the top, or
Yeah, let's start it, and then I want to do the end.
let's see if that fits.
So aesthetically, also there's similarities, but also divergences in the way both directors decide how to use and frame images. I'll say a bit later about the movement called the Neue Sachlichkeit, or new objectivity, the new matter-of-factness, which I think some of those images of buildings are quite reminiscent of. And then we get the news, the dark times. This is 1931. you're looking for an ad for a job, you're competing with hundreds of your friends. So we'll look a little bit at these scenes of the young and jobless looking for employment. The difference in the kind of machinery, the bicycle, dominates this first sequence, and then you even had a horse-drawn carriage, which, Germany in the 20s, though, going madly and successfully into high industrialization, modernization, also had, plenty of remnants of the agrarian past. One of the things the filmmakers were very conscious of doing is avoiding concentrating on individual faces or figures, like not allowing you to follow, for very long until, later, but then it draws back from it again, a character or a character arc. So when you can, showing a group with enough, detail and definition to be involved, to care, but also making it clear that this is a group identity. We're all in this. And all day long, that's what you're spending your time doing, looking for a possible job, even if just for a couple of days. and then we're singling out our one character, the young man whose family we will spend time with today. Have a few glimpses of some ways in which workers were represented, in particular by the Social Democratic Party, which was, I always thought it was the oldest socialist party in Europe, and certainly, where does socialism come from, if not Germany, at least Marxism? But in fact, Portugal in 1871 had the first, mass workers' party. But even before the First World War, 1910, the Social Democratic Party, Socialist Party had already become the largest electoral bloc in Germany, and remained so. And as I'll tell the story about the founding and disintegration of the Weimar Republic, the Social Democratic Party has a big role to play, often not such a commendable role, but it was given probably by the victors, the Allies, who won the Triple Entente, who won the First World War, insisted that the German Empire, the Kaiserreich, which had been basically the form of power and government in Germany since the 1860s, when Germany first became a unified nation state. The King of Prussia was asked to kind of take on the role as monarch, and so the crown had been passed through that family, and the Kaiser, who was pathetic, Wilhelm II, was widely blamed by not only by the Allies, who were determined to punish Germany, but also by many people in Germany for his policies and for his militarism, and he was, very reluctantly forced to abdicate. And then some very strange moves over like a couple of days. The new chancellor, Prince Max von Baden, who was himself an aristocrat, was given the role of kind of pulling this thing together, making Germany into the kind of state that could accept defeat and then could be tolerated by the Allies, who were determined to enforce, a very punitive peace treaty on Germany. And Prince Max was like, oh, I don't think I can handle this, even though he was like the cousin of the emperor. He was actually liberal. And he said, well, the Social Democratic Party is the majority party. They should take the responsibility for starting this republic. Which was not, sounds like a great gift. Finally have a chance to do it. It turned out to be, almost a recipe for disaster. But nonetheless, the Social Democratic Party retained its strength. Still understood for many, many years as the Workers' Party. The Communist Party grew out of a breakaway group from the Social Democratic Party. There was a majority Social Democratic Party, and then a minority or independent SDP. The minority party then kind of formed itself as a communist party and never went into coalition with the SDP. The SDP, as the majority party, was nonetheless, a working class party, right? What was there were at one point 41 political parties in Germany during the Weimar Republic. It seemed to be like every year or so there was another party. But the other parties were, some of them consider themselves centrist liberal, some of them consider themselves left liberal, but a lot of them were right-wing and nationalist parties. And so to govern at all required a coalition, required that the cabinet and the actual running of government, as well as the running of parliament, would be shared between these different political parties who basically hated each other. And we're not very good at forming coalitions. Germany today is still governed by a coalition in which the SDP is at the moment, the leading member, but a pretty pathetic leadership, especially since Angela Merkel is no longer the leader, who was not herself SDP. Anyway, the official policy and program of the SDP remained the desire for revolution, for socialization and a transformation of society in the direction of socialism. So despite the compromises that the party and its leaders made with the other political parties and with industry and capitalism, not quite with the nationalists, but with the more conservative groups in Germany, the party itself remained very popular among the working class, and its sort of cultural arms, produced some wonderful art and propaganda, though not film. One of the things to neglect. Okay, so this is from the other side, the Communist Party, which by 1920 has, formed itself as a new non-SDP party. What's going on here? The other one was clearly idealized. What do you think the message is of this poster? It's an electoral, post, advertisement. This is Hugo Stinnes, who was an industrialist, conservative, more right-wing, incredibly rich and powerful. And he's the enemy. Usually you'll see very similar imagery for portraying the enemy, very often not so much in communist propaganda, but in many of the conservative and nationalist parties. The enemy, often the capitalist, is portrayed with stereotypical Jewish features. But here he's just the enemy. Would you rather have him, or would you rather have us? These are his friends, the bourgeoisie, the military, crushing and destroying and making money and, almost like, stepping on the SPD who have to lick their feet. I think that's what's going on there, and kind of is what happened. So the only alternative is to take arms and march with your comrades. And you can vote. All right, another Communist Party image. What's going on in this one? Geschmeiß, I think it really means shit, not just mess. Who are the enemies? Who are the people that have to be pushed off the cliff?
Military person?
Military people, people with mustaches and glasses. That's usually a sign for the bourgeoisie. If you have any friends who have mustaches and glasses, you might warn them. Also, the clothes are a way to signify your class identity and your politics. In Kuhle Wampe, the cap, is the workers' cap. The clothes that they're wearing to bicycle is definitely what young workers in particular would wear. If you wear a suit and a tie and high collar like that, you are a bourgeois. So the military, the industrialists, capitalists, probably a Jew here, so can't deny it. Nobody wants to stomp on Jews now. This one. But a lot of people on the left are Jewish. All right, so the Social Democratic Party here. Not only are they the biggest party, they're list number one, which is a kind of sign. Parliament. What is it saying? Here's a worker. So what's happening in the image? What's he carrying? Maybe books or newspapers. He's going to know stuff, educated. The worker is not just downtrodden and works until he drops and falls asleep. He's upright, very strong in social democratic and socialist imagery and also communist. The worker is always portrayed young. This is one of the objections Siegfried Krakauer made to Kuhle Wampe, that when you see old people, the older proletariat and petty bourgeoisie in Kuhle Wampe, like in the scenes in the tent camp and also in the engagement party, they're portrayed very unsympathetically. You know, they don't have the proletariat heroism and vigor and athleticism. So they're left out when come the revolution. But yes, the worker is intelligent, is thoughtful. He's, you know, kind of gone into this. He's sort of looked at what, you know, what's important, you know, what the issues are, where his interest lies, and he's going to vote, choose in very big letters, and he will get his hands on Parliament. You know, this is for you. This is yours. It is your Parliament. This is a new message to give to the working class. And you will get it, and you deserve it, and you will kick out those who don't deserve it, who are, you know, small and weak and tripping on themselves, carrying what? What are they trying to run away with? Bags of money. That's all they care about. He has books and athleticism. They are overweight and have money. And who else is being kicked out? The church, so the religion. So social democracy in favor of, you know, the working class, against the capitalists, against the rich, and against the church. It may have been a problem for some voters. And I think this has got to be an aristocrat. He's got spurs on his boots and a whip, so he's normally on a horse, but he's lost his horse and he's down there with the rest of you, being kicked out of power. Or just to give some of the game away, during those weeks that I was talking about that were, you know, very confusing and very fraught, and a lot of the Weimar Republic week by week was like that, but these weeks in November during the, you know, the revolution, the German Revolution, when the army and the navy, in particular the sailors, had mutinied, had rebelled in the last weeks of the war, at the time that they knew an armistice was coming, they knew that the war was to end, and their leaders, officers were keeping them there, were sort of like unwilling to give up, you know, wanting to have like one more push, you know, let's win, let's just put all of our weapons to it and sacrifice our brave, you know, our brave soldiers and sailors, just to show that we're not going to go down, you know, quietly, that we have to be destroyed and wiped out before we're defeated, before we give in, and the sailors and soldiers started the rebellion. Pulling the medals and the insignia and the epaulets off of their officers, taking over, demanding to you know, take over government, forming councils, revolutionary councils on the model of the Russian Soviet. And so that was going on. Then there was like, you know, the revolution, you know, spread to different parts of Germany. So it's happening at the very moments that the social democratic leaders, Friedrich Ebert and Philipp Scheidemann, are being asked to form a government, to kind of keep things together long enough to get through the process of negotiating with the victors and figuring out the terms of the armistice. And then they were also given the responsibility of kind of sponsoring the writing of a new constitution, a new government form for Weimar. And I'll say a bit more later about why it's called Weimar, for the, you know, the new German Republic. But Ebert, who was the first, at first the chancellor and then the president of the Weimar Republic until 1925, when he died, so probably the most important figure from this party in the first part of Weimar, when he was talking to Prince von Baden, who said, well, of course, you know, there's this revolution going on, what are we going to do? And Ebert says, I hate the revolution worse than sin. Which not only is a very strong thing to say, but for a social democrat to be talking about sin is kind of interesting. This is, you know, this is the party that's going to, you know, displace religion. So a strange kind of socialist. All right, 28. So this is late in both of these posters are from late post-Ebert in the history of Weimar. Another communist advertisement for itself. What's going on here? This is part of what we do in critical visual studies, sort of figure out what images are saying. In this case, they've got to be simple enough. They've got to be clear-cut enough for anybody to recognize what they're on about, even from a distance. You don't have television. A lot of people can't afford, even especially the working class can't necessarily afford to buy too many magazines or newspapers. They may have a radio, but what you have is a lot of placards and posters, and very kind of talented people working on the design of them. Here's another strong and virile worker, but chained up, right? Even as chained, what is he doing? Who is he kicking out? Yeah, so he's kicking out the leader of the Social Democratic Party, who is wearing a suit. It's like, you're not supposed to be a socialist in a mustache and gray hair and wearing a suit. It goes against the iconography. Who's up there? Yeah, somebody with an iron cross. So, military, dignitary. The enemies of the amnesty, meaning, these are the forces that have been opposed to peace between, labor and the government, and were also opposed really to the foundation of the Weimar Republic. Kick them out, vote for the communists. It never really happened. The communists were never able to get a very large share of the vote. Okay, some other pretty cool ones. More complex. this one you kind of have to think about. But not list 1, but list 5. So remember it. You're the hand. You have 5 fingers on your hand. Use them all. Don't neglect it. Know what party to vote for. And back to the Social Democrats. And here, fatal times, 1930. The Nazi party and all its followers are quite active. They've won a lot of seats in the Reichstag in the July election of 1930. They had failed under Hitler, Hitler's. In 1923, there had been a putsch backed by other kind of right nationalists, but with Hitler as the figurehead and also kind of the spokesperson. It was put down. There was a general. At that point, the SPD called out its followers and its own troops and put down the putsch. Hitler was put on trial and put into jail, but he was not left in jail. He was there for barely a year. So quite the opposite happened. There was agitation, street violence, demonstrations, fighting, both on the left and the right. But the courts, remember, the courts had still the kind of same figures in the judicial system that had been there under the Kaiser. The sentences that they laid down were very asymmetrical. Violence from the right, assassins from right-wing and nationalist groups got quite short sentences. Sometimes were let off or allowed to leave the country, and not at all the case for those on the left, especially the communists. So the fascists are there. They're your enemy. The Hakenkreuz is the swastika. The Bürgerblock is the group of the bourgeoisie. So still, the worker is the one who has to fight against the bourgeoisie and against fascism in the name of the Social Democratic Party. So maintaining its strong kind of revolutionary workers image. And then women. There were certainly women in Social Democratic Party and Communist Party. I can't recall any of them having positions in the government, which is pretty extraordinary. They got to vote, They had been given from the time of the Republic, 1918, 1919, full equal rights. Nonetheless, they're not there. They're not the judges. They're not the juries. They are not given high positions. Even in the Communist Party, I mean, you had Clara Zetkin, you had Ruth Fisher, but it was still a male-dominated party. But all the parties knew that they had to appeal to women. And so they used a lot of imagery. Sometimes this sort, the powerful, assertive, warrior, woman, fight with us, you can work, you can do it, you're a worker. And then in the more centrist and conservative parties, women are portrayed rather differently as mothers, as sympathetic. So lovely. I'll look at some more images before we talk more about my theory. All right, to remind you of the movement of the film. This we were looking at the unemployed on their bikes, not lazy, not idle. Remember that the young man who's depressed and saddened and throws himself out of a window, carefully leaving his watch on the windowsill so that it doesn't break. So one of the very few valuable things they have in their house. But he's accused by his father and his mother of being idle, of being lazy, of not trying. After you've seen, these sequences of them, trying all they can, and then the not focusing in, too tightly. You don't see the suicide. We see the window. We barely hear it, and then we see the after effects. The crowd that gathers, the body that's picked up, and people in the neighboring buildings noticing, looking out from the window, children looking, and then somebody saying, well, just one less of the unemployed. Okay, some images from this is the family, the mother and father, mother desperately trying to figure out how to make her money last to get, one more meal, while the father is reading the newspaper, an exciting, salacious article about Mata Hari, very, seductive, glamorous. And then another. This is interestingly one of the few shots of actual factory work in the film, whereas Metropolis begins with the machines, and expect to look at just the crowds very anonymously moving in and out on cue. Here, we see work, but we see the human bodies differentiated in their involvement in it, expressions, faces, but also work is something that you do, but it doesn't. It's not your whole identity. And then the Ernst Busch character, Fritz, I think his name is, Fritz and Annie, the couple, working in an auto shop. He's a mechanic, so skilled, and therefore also, rather arrogant. I mean, he knows his worth. He's the one who's living in the tent colony. And if you go, as I hope you do, to the Berlin program through critical and visual studies, you can visit Kuhle Wampe. It's a park area with swimming and activities that's still there on the outskirts of Berlin in a lake. And the name is very funny. I think it just means something like, in slang, something like flat stomachs or empty stomachs, and it's not quite translatable. But it still has a name as a place. And it was a holiday camp, so it would have been like a workers' holiday place that you go on the weekend in the summer, and you bring your family and tents and your food, and everybody plays together and cooks together. But then, given unemployment and homelessness, this becomes a place where people live and help each other. So he's the one. So Fritz is already working there, and when Annie and her family are kicked out of their house, evicted because they can't pay rent, they come to live with him. All right, this image, does anybody remember where this comes in the film?
Part of abortion?
Yeah, when she's worried about being pregnant, you're constantly seeing all these images of babies. Sometimes real babies in the street, or photographs, idealized, babies in pregnancy. Whether it means like, I hate this, or I love it, or I'm terrified. All right, some more. So this is sharing food at the engagement party. All right, let's look at a few images. All right, this I mean, if I had to say, I'll say a bit more about the coexistence and division between Neue Sachlichkeit and Expressionism. Neue Sachlichkeit, which some of you will have, run across if you do any art history. Has anybody run across the category before? The new objectivity. It was given that name by somebody who was putting together, an exhibition at the time, noticing the similarity of kind of formal means and interest in a bunch of different artists. Associated with matter-of-factness, a kind of sobriety, rather than, the kind of intense symbolism and emotional heights and sensation of Expressionism. So Neue Sachlichkeit might sort of just take out and focus on, a particular detail of, of a cup or a car or a face. Very interested in, the faces of everybody, just looked at for themselves, without trying to interpret them or, trying to organize them in any other tableau, just to kind of see things without judgment. That was sort of the mood or principle of Neue Sachlichkeit, a kind of detachment, coolness, an appraisal, critical appraisal, but also one that doesn't jump to conclusions, that isn't already interpreting. Expressionism, if Neue Sachlichkeit is pretty well associated with the second part of the Weimar period. Expressionism, which I'm sure you have heard of, is an art movement. Again, people don't invent it for themselves, but somebody says, oh, yeah, that's what you're doing, and yeah, that's what you're doing. It started before the war, and it's very much an international movement. If Neue Sachlichkeit is specifically German, and probably, linked to the kind of a different sort of aestheticization of industry, of mechanically produced things. Expressionism kind of was the backlash, or perhaps the forward resistance to modernization and mechanization. So the Expressionists often lived in like small communities in rural places, or worked as small groups, trying to separate themselves from urban society, but also from the market. And the Fauves in France, I think, there's a lot of cross-currents between Fauvism and Expressionism. It tends to be in the visual arts, a mode of representation that uses very intense colors, exaggerated shapes, and somewhat, stylized, but without going all the way over into, constructivism or abstraction. So it still has a, close connection to the human figure and to, human life, but trying to use images to express the inner self, the emotions in their raw state. Now in film, Expressionism had this kind of brief but very influential course during the period from 1919 to maybe 23 or 24. Does anybody know what's a German Expressionist film? Anybody can done any Weimar? Weimar Center.
Dr. Caligari.
Dr. Caligari. So that was The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was the first very explicitly Expressionist film. It was a knockout. It became incredibly popular and famous outside of Germany. It brought attention of the world to what was going on in German movies and German art. And for much of the rest of the world, for Hollywood in particular, Germany was Expressionism, and some of the people associated with it were immediately sought after and brought to Hollywood in the early 20s to work for the movies there. And what what Hollywood later developed as film noir picked up and kind of processed a lot of the Expressionist imagery, especially the extreme darks and lights and the moodiness and the sort of the sense of dread and mystery and the sinister. That was also associated with Expressionism. So Lang was like a magpie, sort of pretty polymorphous. in the things that he used. Canny enough to use a lot from Expressionism, but also to make fun of it. As just, this is just a style, this is a trick, this is a fashion. Uses it, I think, quite, front and center in this movie, in Metropolis, and also in some of his earlier movies, Dr. Mabuse and the Siegfried movies. And then in a movie towards the very end of the Weimar period, again, 1931, sound era, the Testament of Dr. Mabuse, he has changed his form and way of as an M, changes radically to using what I would think of as a more Neue Sachlichkeit style and realism. But here, realism isn't the point. So Expressionism kind of picks things up from the past, from myth, from fairy tale, especially like fairy tale, folk tale, ghost stories. Very interested in material from the kind of Middle Ages, especially things that involve spirits and haunting and magic and wizardry. So I don't think that's completely absent in the way Lang portrays the poor workers. This is just a crazy map of the catacombs where Maria is meeting with the workers. This is a scene from the story that Maria tells the workers who have, come to her for guidance and just for moral support. They're depressed and shocked, and perhaps they're potentially revolutionary, but they don't sort of have the power or the opportunity to do it. And she is sort of cautioning them, both trying to inspire them, give them courage, and says, you just must wait. There is going to be a Messiah. There's going to be a mediator who will come and will, get you out of this horror. Right? And so she tells them the story almost as a warning tale about what happens to those who try to revolt, who try to, build this tower and challenge the gods, and then through their arrogance and their hubris, they're all, tossed into incomprehension and exile. Another, pretty appalling scene from the workers laboring in this case. An image from Egypt. And here is Maria, the false Maria. You can tell because she has eye makeup. The real Maria doesn't. And I think both Marias tend to pull at their chest all the time. Strangely enough, it's quite a common gesture in the film. And talking to and exhorting the workers, in this case, whipping them up into rebellion. Wolfgang, the inventor, kind of was like a medieval wizard, and his creation. So the part of Metropolis that I think nobody who has seen it ever forgets is the vamp machine, both her creation and the idea of her. All right, so at this point, see if I can find a more worker-centric one, otherwise I'll stay with this. It's such a famous image, we might as well stay for a bit. All right, how are we for time? So I've written a paper, but as usual, I never got a chance to read my own papers.
You've got a few minutes.
Oh dear. All right. We have.
You want to turn it off?
Yeah, no, I need some light.
Yes.
Yeah. Turn it off. Okay. All right. So today, just to say, what I'm doing, what my project is, how my research, fits in with the Weimar Republic that I've been telling you about, and generally. Some of my time I am a film theorist, and sometimes I'm a philosopher. And together with my colleague Hannes, whom I think a lot of you will know, we're writing a book called Weimar's Influencing Machines, Politics, God, and the Movies, 1918 to 1933. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about what Weimar was, but more in the context of these movies. Both of the movies that I asked you to watch are political. They're also, as movies, influencing machines. And in some ways, the cinema is one of our many influencing machines. What do I mean by influencing machines? Well, the term Hannes and I got from Victor Tausk, who was a psychoanalyst kind of cycle of is that how is it got a C? I think it's got a K, yeah. Victor Tausk was supposed to be one of the most, brilliant of Freud's followers, but ran afoul of him, and eventually himself killed him, committed suicide. But he had a patient, a schizophrenic patient, who had a young woman who had this kind of interesting obsession. She believed that her body was not controlled by herself, but that there was this outside thing, this machine that had managed to kind of, capture her and use her kind of organ by organ, in particular sexual organs, but all of her body, and move it according to its will. So that's kind of an extreme image of what an influencing machine might be and do. There are also, just ordinary conscious influencing machines. I mean, you could say education is an influencing machine. Propaganda, certainly, which we've seen a bit of. All political programs, the way they want to make us think, the way they want to make us identify with certain images or respond in certain ways. Myths, ideologies, mass media. And unfortunately, in our context, in Weimar, charismatic leaders are influencing machines who can cast spells and create the vocabularies within which their audiences identify themselves. So in early Weimar, in the period of Expressionism, there was a lot of use of figures who are hypnotists, who are, mad scientists, but also have these magic powers, unless they're vampires, to control you through your mind or through your body and make you do things that you don't want to do, that you don't even know you're doing. So that image of the hypnotist was picked up looking back at Weimar cinema, actually, by one of our famous critical theorists, and I know some of you study in critical visual studies critical theory, cultural criticism, Adorno, Walter Benjamin, and Siegfried Kracauer is one of the original and most important members of that generation, and was somebody who took popular culture very seriously. He didn't condescend to it, which you may find annoying in some of the other critical theorists. He was not an academic. I mean, he had degrees in philosophy, but he, stayed well away from the professorial lectern, and he wrote for the daily press, and he wrote a lot of movie reviews, and also novels. All right, so he's a good guy. After the war, he became, he got away, went into exile, not in Los Angeles with, Lang and Brecht, although he knew both of them, but in New York, and not in the New School or Columbia, where some of the other, more doctoral types went to. But he was given a position at the Museum of Modern Art in the Film Archive, which was just beginning there, founded by Iris Barry. And there he, got to look again at many of these films that he had watched as a practicing journalist in the 20s. And now he had this idea of writing a book on the Weimar cinema, looking back at it with, as I say, 20/20 hindsight, as a precursor to what happened after. And his book is called From Caligari to Hitler. And that sort of tells you. It's on what he sort of considers the unconscious of Germany, the way Germany was already anticipating, dreaming in its fantasies and in its films what was to come. That you could look at films like Metropolis, probably not Kuhle Wampe, which was more the kind of film he admired and wanted to see, but Dr. Caligari, Metropolis, Nosferatu, Dr. Mabuse, all show what he thought of as these various forms of hypnotic madmen who had the power to, lure and stupefy people, but who the people really wanted. They wanted to be dominated. There was some secret, unspoken desire for authoritarian power. Now that was not always so secret. It was not always so implicit. In the right, in the 1920s, there was much more explicit and deliberate interest in getting back a powerful leader, whether a monarch or a dictator. But according to Kracauer, this film industry itself, basically kind of left innovative, avant-garde, nonetheless kept, going back to these images of control of the mind, right? So influencing machines. One of the things I think that Hannes and I are doing is like, inheriting Krakauer's project. With its mistakes, you can't look at everything as looking ahead to something it doesn't know about. You can't look backwards from fascism and see everything as, predicting it or almost, being ready to be, stepped upon. But I do think the idea of looking at films as symptomatic, as, potential allegories, is a good one, is an interesting one. There are also less tangible influencing machines that work through their effects on our inner lives without our knowing it. And we could think of the Freudian unconscious as also an influencing machine, perhaps the image of the extreme, the schizophrenic, who, externalizes this idea that the machine really exists, and she wants to find it. I think works of art are often influencing machines, and have been. This is one of the reasons why a radical theory of art, Brecht's theory of art, Brecht's artistic practice, wants to use art to criticize art. Brecht and the critical tradition associated with him, which probably does, at some level include, the more Marxist side of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory, suspicion of the affirmative character of culture as something that can, dominate and such a culture industry, use us to its own purposes. How do you say no to this? How can we, resist the power of cultural hypnosis, which is not just in art or, deliberate propaganda or, the media, but also in common sense. There are ways in which what everybody knows, what everybody takes for granted, what everybody assumes, like everybody wants to be in a family, or everybody wants to fall in love, or even everybody wants a job, can also be part of this, this ideological lure and mystification that we have no choice at some point but to subscribe to. How do we do that? How do we say no to that? And how do we say no to the pleasures of the spectacle? The brilliance and sensationalism of an artist like Lang. Not so easy. Brecht's program, which was first articulated in our period of Weimar, was actually quite difficult to carry off. Either in, more successful in theater, probably, most successful in his poetry. In cinema, which was the, ideal in many ways for a radical, communist program, because it was a mass art, a popular art, an art that everyone can understand. It doesn't require, education. Cinema should be the means of political education and also political resistance. But it was very difficult to, to say no to and not respond to the appeal of commercial art, the apolitical and bourgeois art. Should we stop? Okay, we should stop. All right. So if this is right, Brecht had an idea of how to resist art's influencing machine by using art to do so, but very rarely had the opportunity to do that, to kind of make works of art that could induce critical reaction and resistance on the part of the spectator, to make the spectator learn and question, talk back, rather than perhaps to enjoy. Can you also enjoy it? Film is tricky. Some doubted whether the fascination of the image and the lure of narrative, which is another thing that he tries to resist, could really be resisted. And in my student days, there was a lot going on, a lot of interest in the idea of a Brechtian cinema. And the new film theory of the 70s was quite interested in that. But I think you can also see it in Jean-Luc Godard, the attempt to interrupt the spectacle, to use, words, text, agitation, other kinds of provocations to interrupt our attraction to and our being sewn into narrative. But it's hard to do. Film spectators do seem, we usually, psychologically programmed to look for the charms of narrative, to find a story, to seek out characters, And also to expect something deeper, the exploration of inner life and motivation. To also want highs and lows and dramatic resolutions. And all of these, Brecht says, are bourgeois. This isn't just part of art, it isn't just part of storytelling. In a way, it's the bourgeois culture and its power that has made these seem so alluring. So this was the kind of art and the kind of pleasure, I suppose, that he wanted to resist with this film that he made at the end of the Republic. It comes as close as possible to that ideal. A film with a collective subject, a film that, though it uses narrative, it doesn't, just bind you into, one narrative arc and one particular person, their development, their pain. And I'll probably end here, though I have the one episode that was actually taken up and criticized by the censor when this film came out was the episode of the suicide. So this film, Kuhle Wampe, they're coming out when, already the Nazis are pretty strong. The Communist Party is weak. The Nazis and the nationalists can get quite far by saying, we don't want Bolshevism here. We don't want, communist takeover. Nonetheless, that wasn't why the film, initially attracted censorship. There were two reasons. They said it was, it ran afoul of religion because it had one scene no longer there where naked young swimmers are accompanied by church bells in the distance. So I thought that was like being ironic toward religion. And the other one is the idea that in the suicide, we don't get a chance to kind of really feel, pity and involvement and sympathy and motivation for this character who kills himself. And the censor suggested that really, where that belongs is the end of the film. It should be the, that's the dramatic, culmination. That's the commentary on, the suffering and misery of the workers. And therefore, the viewer could walk away from the film having felt, kind of catharsis. Yes, that is terrible, and isn't it appalling that this poor young man has to kill himself and not, think any more about, the 5,000 other people who are there happily singing and performing. And Brecht said, finally somebody got what I was doing. The censor actually understood his aesthetic means and criticized them, and then said, okay, if you want to do this, go ahead and do it. Okay, so I will put the rest of the talk on Canvas or some other forums so that people can read it, and you'll know a bit more about, other comparisons I want to make between these two films and about Weimar Republic. But if you're interested in any of this, what I recommend is, first of all, you sign up for the Berlin program and come to Berlin, visit Kuhle Wampe, come and look at many of the Expressionist and Neue Sachlichkeit paintings. You can look at them for $20 at the Neue Gallery, but we can take you to Berlin where you can spend a whole term in the heart of the Weimar Republic. And also the course on Weimar film and culture will be taught in the spring. Everybody is urged to take that. Okay, so now we should have, comments and I wanted to play the Solidarity song, and you're not going to stop me.
No, not yet.
Of course.
I haven't put it up here also.
So we mentioned singing in dark times, and I mentioned Ernst Busch, who plays Fritz, and this is a song that he made, super famous.
Vorwärts, die Interessen, worin unsere Stärke besteht. Beim Hunger und Vergessen, vorwärts, nicht vergessen, die Solidarität. Baut ihr Völker dieser Erde, einigt euch in diesem Sinn, dass sie jetzt die eure werde und die große Näherin. Vorwärts, und nie vergessen, worin unsere Stärke besteht. Ein Hunger und Vergessen, vorwärts, nicht vergessen, die Solidarität. Schwarzer, weißer, brauner, gelber, ändert ihre Schlechtereien. Reden erst die Völker selber, werden sie schnell einig sein. Vorwärts und nie vergessen, worin unsere Stärke besteht. Ein suchen wir noch dich und dich. Wer im Stich lässt seinesgleichen, lässt ja nur sich selbst im Stich. Vorwärts und nicht vergessen, worin unsere Stärke besteht. Beim Hunger und Vergessen, vorwärts, nicht vergessen, die Solidarität. Unsere Herren, wer sie auch seien, sehen unsere Zwietracht gern, denn solange sie uns entzweien, bleiben sie doch unsere Herren. Vorwärts und nicht vergessen, worin unsere Stärke besteht. Ein Hunger und Vergessen, vorwärts, nicht vergessen, die Solidarität. Proletarier aller Länder, einigt euch und ihr seid frei. Eure großen Regimenter brechen jede Tyrannei. Vorwärts und nicht vergessen, die Frage an jeden gestellt ist Hunger oder Essen. Wessen Morgen ist der Morgen, wessen Welt ist die Welt.
Around the world, ja. Wem gehört die Welt? It's yours.
Okay, let's open it up for questions, and we can take about like 15 minutes or so. Thank you so much. This is lovely and extremely evocative. So, anybody want to start us off?
What did you think of the films?
I liked Kuhle Wampe more than Metropolis. Yeah, I didn't particularly love the ending either. It had its momentum, but yeah.
What's the ending of Kuhle Wampe? Do people remember the scene in the train? What are they on about?
Coffee.
Yeah.
Start with the coffee thing, and the dialogue just flow away with different characters in the train. They're talking on like different topics and went to different directions.
Yeah, but there is a unifying thing. There's somebody's reading the paper and there's a headline that in Brazil, millions of pounds of coffee are being destroyed to keep the price up. We should not be unfamiliar. Enforced scarcity. And these are people who'd like be pretty happy if they could get a cheaper cup of coffee. Some of them are coming from the big meeting where there's been the Red Megaphone, which is this kind of proletariat performance group. Do the show. It gets a bit boring, and then there's lots of singing, and you've had days of the sports events and workers games, and they're going home. So that's been their day out. So it's like showing that there is leisure, there is pleasure. Work isn't just tying yourself into the to the machine. But they're mixed, and they're in a public space mixing with people from other classes and other generations. So again, it's like older people who are not exactly portrayed sympathetically.
So we also have some folks here on Zoom, so I'm gonna ask questions from them, and then I also maybe will pepper some in. So Rick asks, maybe you could say a little more about how World War I and the flu epidemic affected the Expressionists. So we can take that first, and then.
The flu epidemic, that would be really interesting, especially since we've had a very, very similar one. Illness is a big theme for Expressionism, illness and madness, which is something that I think the kind of left-wing art really wants to hold at a distance. World War I comes in the middle of Expressionism, so there has been quite a lot of activity among Expressionist artists, some of whom did have to fight, and some of them died. Whether it didn't seem to exhaust their energy or the interest in their work, but it also didn't spur it in a way that if you compare that to Dada, an anti-art movement, the war, kind of the madness of the war, the absurdity of this was every reason to both kind of react against traditional ideas of beauty and aesthetic invention and creativity, and to kind of do Dada instead, which was absurd and sometimes obnoxious or ridiculous and provocative. But it definitely saw itself as started by the war and would have a kind of finite moment. It was a kind of activist reaction. Expressionism, it's a good question, but I don't have a good answer for it. Yeah, the Neue Sachlichkeit artists are very affected by the war, and also the traces of the war on the streets. A lot of people are coming back, they're not just like dead bodies, a huge loss of young men and older men in Germany, but enormous number of cripples, of disabled people, blinded, and with shell shock. So that the Neue Sachlichkeit artists who want to also produce art that's not pretty, especially people like Otto Dix and Georg Gross, the war and the imagery of the war, is pretty, obsessive. With Expressionism, I don't know. With the movies, there have certainly been interpretations that see them as reacting to the war, to authoritarianism of the war, the deception of it, and also the kind of the phenomenon of what the Germans call like Kadava Gehorsam, or obedience, the obedience of the corpse. That perhaps this is what military life requires of you, not to think for yourself, not to have any interiority or agency. You might as well just be a dead body pulled along by a leader. So I think, that idea of the war as a threat to, a threat to humanity and a threat to individuality was something that Expressionism, could well have been taking up. I couldn't really answer that.
Did anybody else have a question in the meantime, or yes?
What was quite interesting in terms of the film was like the difference between the pulsating march and then the bike and that wheel kind of just moving.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's other stuff happening in regards to that as it relates to new objectivity or in general.
Yeah. I mean, think of you have the pulsing, machinery in Metropolis, but it's just to kind of produce tension and like almost higher and higher steam until it explodes, as you see the machine exploding. Whereas the movement in Kuhle Wampe, it's like the movement of the bicycles and the sound that goes with it. I don't know, what do you think it creates? And then there's the coordinated movement of bodies in the park scenes and the demonstration scenes, which since you wouldn't know whose politics is going on with the same coordinated crowd scenes are obviously in Leni Riefenstahl and in right-wing movies. But the bicycles, the way they're photographed really reminds me of a lot of Neue Sachlichkeit photographs. As far as the motion, that's interesting. Very typical Expressionist movement, for instance, is quite jagged and abrupt, or else kind of paralyzed and startled. So there seems to be this, if you look at Expressionist films, a lot of toing and froing between these very jerky movements and kind of hyper, so hysteric movements, hysteria, and then freezing. Where I would think in both the Kuhle Wampe film and in Neue Sachlichkeit, there's a refusal to use motion in that overly hyperbolic and what kind of emotive way. And to kind of read it into machinery also.
on the topic of machinery, you mentioned the sort of like interesting point that there's really only like that one scene of the sort of like conveyor belt, which is strikingly shot scene, but even then it's sort of cutting back and forth. Workers on the side, right, just doing their normal thing. A lot of focus on kind of like social reproduction. You had the slide of the sharing of the food or whatever. What do you make of that in comparison to Metropolis?
Why is it so minimal? I don't know. I mean, it's certainly not showing work as dominated by the movement, the mechanism, the noise of the factory. I guess one would expect it's more a human scale, but it's also just not that present. I mean, the beginning is like what it is not to be able to work,
right,
rather than work itself. Any other images of work? I mean, cooking is work. Yeah, putting up tents. Putting the furniture into the car and getting it to the, so there's cooperative movement, interaction, and as you say, social reproduction, emotional work, but certainly turning away from the idea that this is the dominant image. This is the focus of where work is now, where labor is now.
And so just like politically, do you think that choice is meant to emphasize like kind of like broader constitution of the working class and need for solidarity, or
I mean, it's you're not defined through your particular trade, which is again, the Social Democratic Party, came together also with a lot of smaller groups and union groups, which had very strong attachment identification with the trade, which is often like passed down from generation to generation. And so the idea that there would be a common, organization of all these different trades, including like artisans and people in workshops, and creative writers, creative workers, was a hard push. It wasn't obvious, and it seems that in the Kuhle Wampe, we're turning away from that. The Social Democratic Party in Germany and like its predecessors, in the labor movement in the 30s and 40s, really the energy started with artisans and with workshops. Like you get also workshops in the 1848 revolutions. So it's artisans rather than mechanized workers, or it could be we don't see anybody on ships. We don't see people moving goods from place to place. All the other forms of work are pretty invisible. I mean, in Metropolis, we also get the work from top. Is the master? Well, it's work. Running everything is also kind of work. Yeah.
A question more like process.
Yeah.
You talked the Weimar class a few times for a while, right? I mean, for how you've been teaching the Weimar class for 10 years? Is that right?
Sorry,
the Weimar class you taught it for like 10 years or so, is that right?
What, me?
Yeah.
Not the Weimar Republic itself.
Well, I mean, something about that.
I've taught it a lot longer than the Weimar Republic class did. No, I mean, if you sat down and tried to read all the books on the Weimar Republic, it would take you a lot longer than the 14 years that the Republic lasted.
I was curious about the relationship between teaching and research then, and like how the iterations of the class have kind of maybe moved along with your academic research.
That's a nice question. Though it's we're not here to talk about me. I started teaching Weimar cinema in 2000, 2001, and I've had no training in film. That was not anything I studied, but I always knew stuff about it. And so, back in the past when I was a more proper philosopher, I had a colleague who was going away who had created a class on semiotics and film theory, and he had some conversation with me. He said, "I think you could teach this." So I said, "Okay, I'll teach it." So I taught myself, film and film theory, and I was always interested in German literature. So I took on a Weimar film class up at Columbia, and then I've been teaching it ever since. So this is getting on to 2025. Yeah. So a lot of years. Research. I think I've never given a talk on this material before. I've taught it a lot, but I've never, written about it. And so the project that Hannes and I began came out of teaching. We thought we do so much of this stuff, it's already practically a book. So we thought we'd add to the 15 years of Weimar books that already exist. But yeah, I don't know. So what do you find with teaching and research? Is there a close relation for you?
Sometimes, I don't know. Not always as much as I would like. But it's all in there, so it finds its way into the work one way or another, I think. I know that other folks in the class have been thinking about the readings in relation to the film. So I'm just curious if anybody else here have things that have heard about that, even if it didn't come up in the talk.
No, I'm more curious about what did come up in the talk, but also the question that was burning for me is right now also about you, even though I know we're not supposed to be talking about you.
Did I come from? I'm not as old. I wasn't born in the Weimar Republic.
No, that was not the question. How long have you been working on this book?
Okay. Year and a half, at least. So the title, just appealed to us, and we haven't yet figured out exactly how to, deserve it. I'm not sure if what I said today really proves it. But we're working on different films. So say, Hannes has been writing about the Testament of Dr. Mabuse, Fritz Lang's later film, and also about the conservative revolution and the machine, the relation of worker and machine. And I've been writing about religion. So I've been writing about, this is really telling the truth. What I wanted to do for a long time is to write something called Hating Liberalism Properly. So I usually start with titles, and then I try to figure out what I mean. So liberalism is the target. Liberalism is the kind of the cheap and easy target. It's what everybody in the Weimar Republic hated. Right? The left hated it, even the Social Democrats hated it, the right wing really hated it. But what they meant by it was not what, like, a lot of people in the Anglo-American context mean of liberalism as the free market, as individualism. What else? I mean, you have an expert here. Liberalism, another liberalism here. But I mean, okay, rights. The rights, human rights.
Rights, institutional neutrality, and.
All right, so that was all enshrined in the Weimar Constitution. So the Weimar Constitution, and this gives me a chance to say where we get the name Weimar from, because it's Germany. It's not just one, not such big city in Germany. But when, the Social Democrats and others of the great and good were given this responsibility, and, members of the Reichstag, to go and write a constitution. Like, you've had a monarch, you've had it, you had an empire, you even beat France, you were trying to get colonies, you wanted to compete with Britain, and now you're just back at square one, and you have to become like the liberal democracies. And the liberal democracies in the German eye were, bourgeois democracy. They were written, they were created by the bourgeoisie for itself to kind of carve out a space for itself that was not, that of the aristocracy or the church or the military, but was also not that of the working class. So liberalism represented the ideals and the principles and the self-image of the bourgeoisie. So this is, Germany kind of had a moment of like thinking, well, yes, in the 1840s, and there was a broader front there of liberals and more what would become socialists and revolutionaries, including Blanqui and so on, together, supporting revolutionary uprisings in that period, 1848, 1849 in Germany, and it failed. It shouldn't have failed. It was like already beginning to get going. There was like a Frankfurt, conference to start a republic and to write a constitution, and it, dwindled away. So Germany, went back to being a confederation, then not even a nation state, one place that's German, but still, a mix of principalities. So it wasn't until it's forced, liberalism is forced on the Germans by the victorious allies that it begins to take, shape, and therefore nobody wants it. And they associate it not with the free market and not kind of with capitalism, but more with the parliamentary form of government. And, it was this whole view that, what do parliaments do? They just talk. They just deliberate, and they don't decide. They just compromise, and everything under the, the liberal bourgeois model is just a contract. Just that there's contracts for work, there's contracts for trade. This is turning, something important like, the state, polity, into a form of contract. How degrading, how materialistic and, how low can you get? So that was like the German attitude, certainly from the right. This didn't have any spirit in it, didn't have any heroism in it, but also the left. This was, a middle class invention. So I got hooked on this idea of like, how to think about the hatred of liberalism. And my side of it, that's probably not so common in most understandings of Weimar, is also from theology. Because liberal, you don't want to know this, liberal Protestantism was kind of in the ascendant in the late 19th century. There was, people, insofar as they wanted to remain Christian and also Jewish, it was a time of Reform Judaism, was like, how can we change religion to get rid of all the parts that are, mysterious and supernatural and kind of basically are not sensible, like miracles and revelation and even, the incarnation and the resurrection and all like the, pretty important materials of Christianity. So how can we make Christianity speak the language of today? How can we make it modern? So that was liberal Protestantism, and it's kind of, it's a bit sad because it's sort of like, you're basically, I don't want to use the term masculine, you're taking all the stuffing out of a religion to basically turn it just into a portrait of where the culture is now. Yeah. And you don't need to call that religion, you can call it whatever you like. In this sense, someone like Feuerbach, who's another ancestor, I think, of critical theory in his own way, said that's all theology has ever been doing. It's only been talking about humans. It's only been anthropology, and you take, you project, the things you most admire and idolize about, or would like to like about human nature, and you project them on gods and sacred stories. So, why fool yourself? You can worship yourself. So that was the liberal push seemed to those who resist, who were pissed off by it, to be a deification of humanity, basically just turning religion into religion of humans. And in Germany, there also was a pretty heavy interest in Germany as a religion. Yeah, German nationalism was really considered practically a substitute religion. So I'm against that stuff.
Anybody else have anything you want to ask? I have one more brief question. So you pointed to the way that the Nazis subsequently sort of like took up some of the imagery from Metropolis, or some of the sort of like the ambiguity of the ending. And I wanted to just tie that back to your discussion of sort of like everybody hating hating liberalism here. So like in general, fascism tends to pull from and selectively pull from and subvert and co-opt aspects of sort of like left critiques, right? But you were pointing to the various ways in which the sort of like Brechtian approach to film is in some ways trying to resist that, right? It's trying to, it's at least trying to interrupt some of the dynamics that lend themselves to the fascist appropriation of the imagery. So I was just wondering if you could, like, I know you have a lot to say about the contrast between the films, but I'd be interested to hear you say a little bit more about, like, in what ways does Kuhle Wampe resist that in a way that maybe Metropolis doesn't?
Doesn't. I mean, pretty explicitly. So by the time, by 27, when Brecht is becoming, a more, central and important figure in German culture, and things like the Cirque and the Opera are popular, also popular with bourgeoisie. Fascism is also doing very well, thank you. So to be an artist who's trying to work out a counterattack on the bourgeoisie and on liberalism, which we probably have lots of cases for, is not enough. You need to have a way to resist this rather clever protean, and at times charismatic appropriation of sometimes expressionist imagery, sometimes Neue Sachlichkeit imagery, the pared down architecture, which is like a new, you might say there's a in Metropolis, we kind of see traces of what you might call like a fascist sublime, where the machines or the whole kind of movement toward a verticality is meant to dwarf the people in it or the people watching it to insignificance. But it's the aesthetic of Leni Riefenstahl of Triumph of the Will, and she's following hints that she's been given by the Nazi leaders, and just that she happens to be clever in her uses of art form. The grandiosity, but also the impersonality of fascist aesthetics and fascist politics, fascist mobilization, is already there in the Weimar cinema. When Krakauer says that, he's looking at the particularity of like this wizard, this hypnotic and stupid, authoritarian rhetoric, and how is it already what people, didn't know that they really wanted. He's not looking at the aesthetics of it. So I think there's now, a moment to perhaps look for, some of these other links. The other thing that both the right nationalists and the fascists are doing is that they are suffering for the lack of being, a military nation. And Weimar and, Brecht and a lot of people on the left did, want to make a good case for pacifism. But it's hard to move crowds for pacifism, activism, mobilization. Let's struggle, let's go to war, let's mass and fight and make movement is what gets people going. So that the Kuhle Wampe film has also got to use it, and the Solidarity Song film has to use it. That's the only way that you knock the bastards down. But it is the same way that the fascists use. It's hard to tell the difference if you look at films from that period. Unless you see the caps and the flags, it's hard to tell the difference. So I'm not sure that aesthetically we could draw a clear line. I think in literature it's easier. There's a more ironic, satirical, sort of, a different kind of matter-of-factness in left-wing and even liberal writing, novel and poetry and stuff in the 20s, which you don't get in fascist literature. You have to have heroes and friends and enemies and evil, the evil and the corrupting and the degrading and all the threats to our very existence and essence. It has to be dramatized. And I think there's a writing that doesn't do that at all. But maybe it's hard to say, is that political writing?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm curious about your writing on theology.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if you think communism and socialism can be consolidated with theology in a way that doesn't reject all the mysticism, and maybe like the critiques of, like, I get why mysticism is rejected, but do you think it's possible to?
Yeah, well, I do, but
I do
not
too.
everyone.
I do too.
That's just me. I mean, the people that I'm a fan of were, socialist theologians in the period, before and after the First World War. And I think there are arguments there that are important, like what elements in religious belief are emancipatory and what aren't. you know, for some it's like, well, what you do, you know, what you do in the pulpit and then what you do, you know, in your workers group are quite different things. But more interesting are those who do put them together. And I think, yes, I think I think Dan won't agree, but I think the communist spirit and the theological spirit of a sort certainly can be important. One of the things, like my favorite theologian of the period, whose name is Karl Barth, was a Swiss pastor from the Reformed Church, who was working in Germany in the late 20s and early 30s, and was a socialist, and was kicked out and banned because he wouldn't take the oath of allegiance to Hitler. And he also wrote with a number of other theologians a kind of a description of the church's duty to say no, which is not the same as saying this is a theology that's left or right or anything else. It's just you can't turn the nation state and the leader of the nation state into a god that's a rival to God. That the church has got to be independent. That you can't have a national church. In a way, you can't have theocracy. And I think that was an effective weapon for them to say, well, it's not, we're not taking sides here politically. Just we can't do it. Sorry. Yeah, it's against our principles. And then they also got people out. So that was important. But then there were plenty of people, religious people, who marched in very happily.
Anybody else?
I think we've forgotten.
Very, very last thing then. So I'm just curious if there are any particular lessons or parallels from studying this period in history, which in some ways, seems to have something to say to the present moment, perhaps. So just in terms of thinking through, some of the dangers that you come across in studying the aesthetics of this period, or I think some of that comes out a little bit already in your discussion of Metropolis, but I was just curious, to make it a bit more explicit.
To make it more explicit, the parallels. I mean, the parallels you find it in the history of the Weimar Republic, and more of this I wrote about in the talk. So to read it if you're interested. But it was like a niche culture. You got three people together and they started their own journal. It was very difficult to have a common cause, and that again, we can think of the failure of the refusal of a popular front between the Communist Party and the Social Democratic Party. It could have kept the conservative right nationalists from having a majority in the Reichstag, and then so there's certain important moments where the movement to letting Hitler into the government might have been avoided. Whether that's got any parallel, since we don't have a communist and a social democratic party, but the animosity between them, and it was kind of an enforced no. That even in cultural cooperation, there was meant to be no cooperation of communists with social democratic projects. And there's a lot to be said about what was wrong with the Social Democratic Party. What's obviously parallel is the nationalism, the noxious fear of others, of immigrants, of people. But the language that's used, which probably is used today, I just don't, I don't have the heart to look at the websites. I rely on my way down to look at this. This idea that the others, the Slav, the Jews, that they're a toxin that's going to get in our bloodstream, and any contact with them, culturally, and any other respect, isn't just that it's something that you want to exclude. It's actually dangerous for you. It's going to make you impure. Now, I suspect that that's also in white supremacist rhetoric today, isn't it? I just don't want to know. It's like, I don't have many more years to live. I don't want this to be my last memories is reading white supremacist literature. But this fear, the fear in this country about miscegenation, maybe it's not what it was, but there's a degree of panic about what is the pure stock, the pure race, and how that might be corroded. This was also true in the language of cultural corrosion, and I think that's also present now. There was this term, Besetzen in German, but it's like to be corrosive. A lot of the people, not just on the left, like Brecht, but just the liberals, like Ernst Jünger and so on. The reason their books are burned and they were banned is that they were considered to be corrosive. They weren't supportive enough. They weren't hearted enough. They were ironic or mocking or satirical. And that also, social practices, ethical practices, sexual practices could be corrosive. I think this is a dangerous idea, and it's just repeated so much that I was puzzled by it. This fear that if you allow people to read books, about trans children, they're going to be, something's going to happen to their moral fiber. That there's going to be this that morality is something that can be corroded by people with different ethics, different values. Where did that idea come from? It's just not true. I mean, we're philosophers. We can tell you. That's not what moral judgment is not something that can be corroded in that way. Do you have any sense of the parallels?
I mean, I think there are many. That's not just the discussion that's going to take us far into the discourse, but yeah, it's really like thought-provoking.
You'll hear more about it. You'll have some talks that are talking more about contemporary culture and politics, and even Brecht and Benjamin. So you can't help but see similarities. Obviously the censorship of books, the fear of polluting the minds of the young, that's a very strong element in fascism. That we're only strong if we feel at one, and everybody agrees, and it's us versus them. And it's language that everybody has to be. If you're even slightly not a friend of mine, you're the enemy. Right?
Okay, well, if you all can just join me in thanking me. Thank you. I'm sorry that we ran out of time for the paper. But.
No, it's my fault. I always do this. I write these long things. But it's gonna be part of the book. So when it comes out, I'm sure you'll order a copy.
I'm looking forward to reading it also. If we can
we'll have a book launch, and we'll thank all the